Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this Maximus webinar on Proposition 12. And today we are going to be discussing barn design and implementation. I have two other people joining me today, my colleague at Maximus, Joel Phelps, along with a fifth-generation producer from Indiana, Mr. Brian Martin, who Maximus has been working with over the last couple of years as he's remodeled his 10,000 sow farm with Proposition 12 in mind. So I'd like to remind everybody here that we have a chat box. So if you have any questions, you can address those questions through the chat box. And we have reserved some time at the end to answer as many of the questions that you ask as we can. So I'm going to be hosting the webinar today. As you can see there, my name's Robert Drew, and I've worked for Maximus now for about 3.5 years. And as you can see from the slide, been in the pig industry in the UK and the US for almost 4 decades, which is a little scary. I first worked with ESF back in 1985. At that time, the sows were all wearing big collars around their necks, and we've moved on today to where we have the small RFID tags. So there's been a lot of things that have changed with ESF over the years, and more recently, talks and discussions around Proposition 12 have certainly kept the ESF concept in the industry spotlight. So I'm sure that everybody knows something about Proposition 12 and its pending impact on the US industry. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into the details of Proposition 12. Some of that stuff is still with the Supreme Court today. However, you can see that there's a link at the bottom of the slide here. This information was from the NPPC website. The link is going to be sent out to everyone that's joined us today on the webinar. You'll also get the presentation here, hopefully tomorrow. So you can check out for yourself more information on Proposition 12 by clicking on that link if you care to do so. But with that said, I think the two major challenges that Proposition 12 has presented to the pig industry is 24 square feet per breed and animal as one of the requirements. Typically with ESF, we've always worked at that 20 to 22 square feet. And then the temporary confinement of animals cannot exceed 6 hours in 24 hours and more than 24 hours total in a 30-day period. So we're suddenly looking at different systems here where we're going, certainly with ESF, from a post-implantation system to a pre-implantation system, which clearly is going to have some challenges as we move forward. So all the things that we're going to discuss today involve people, pigs, production, and ultimately the producer's pocketbook. I personally feel that these 4 key elements should be imperative in the decision making of a Proposition 12 barn, and probably you'll look at those 4 Ps, and they're probably the backbone of most of the decisions that people make every day when they're running their pig production business. So if you can try and keep those 4 Ps in mind during the webinar, I think that will be useful. And I put just a little quote at the bottom there about people being your biggest asset. We've said that for years, and I believe that that's going to really be held true as we move towards Proposition 12. So if you decide to make that decision to go to Proposition 12, I think the burning question is, what's the return on your investment? So like I mentioned, when you register for the webinar, you may have downloaded a white paper that I wrote recently, which discusses Proposition 12 and the 4 Ps. This article will be included with the webinar recording and sent out to everybody, hopefully tomorrow. and you can take a look at that information and always get back to myself if you have any questions on that. So with that, I'm going to introduce my colleague at Maximus, Mr. Joel Phelps.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Phelps. I've been with Maximus and installing the Maximus Free Access ESF since about 2014. Been in this industry and affiliated with the swine industry for about 37 years now. My main roles with Maximus is ESF, the design of the pens and the setup of the facilities. Do a lot of work with training and technical support of implementing the free access open pen concepts. And so I work through installation, design, installation, implementation, and then troubleshooting.
So yeah, thanks, Joel. Yeah, between us, we're certainly getting a little bit long in the tooth. However, I think one thing maybe just to start with is in the first probably 6 or 7 years of Maximus having the ESF, you'd always designed the ESF projects using what we term a standard pen layout. So when did producers first start asking you questions on Proposition 12? What was the kind of information that they were looking for? And then how did that affect the way you approached designing a pen and designing a barn?
Yes, so in the fall of 2019, we started getting questions about Proposition 12 and the specs and specifics. Prior to that, we would have done some pre-implantation type loose housing, open pen gestation, but most of it, because of the rules and regulations, allowed us to still use stalls for the first 6 weeks or the pre-implantation phase. So most of what we installed prior to that 2019, 2020 would have been 6 weeks in stalls, 10 weeks of gestation in ESF, our open pens. When we did that, we could get sows through breeding, preg check, heat check, and kind of the first phase of gestation. When we put them into pens, typically we put them at about 20 square feet in our recommendations. We would have run them as a static system. We would have put 15 sows per feed station, and we would put double feeders in a pen. When we got to starting to ask questions about Prop 12, the 20 square feet obviously changed to 24. So we had to build more space in every situation. Prior to Prop 12, we could have done pre-implantation and still had some way to temporarily lock up animals or separate them when they were in heat, or when we were breeding them, those kind of things. Prop 12 took the ability to shorten the temporary portion to 6 hours in a 24-hour period. And so we now have to deal with how are we going to deal with the fallout? How are we going to be able to separate animals? That comes with Prop 12. So there's been like 3 combinations or 3 kind of situations that we continue to talk to or look at and when we're doing the design. That is either free access ESF, free access stalls, or stanchion, or some combination. Most of that is designed in the first 6 weeks. Slide. So when we go to Prop 12, or when we design pens for Prop 12, knowing that we have to have the ability to deal with any fallout that comes in a pen, because remember, we've allowed 24 square feet for every individual animal. So if we just take them out, we're wasting a lot of space. So we originally, with pre-implantation and then again with Prop 12, used free access stalls in the middle between the 2 sets of ESF feeders. So when we were actually breeding, or when a sow needed to be taken care of temporarily, treated, those kind of things. We had this ability to put them, and we still have this ability to put them in these free access stalls. The other thing, it gives the animals a place if they need or desire a place to hide, and when other sows are bothering them. So the free access stalls in the middle gives animals the ability to make some of their own decisions. Next slide. We've also done the same type of system with the same kind of a layout, with just swing gates in the back. That creates a space in between the two sets of doubles in a pen that is about 8 feet by 9 feet or 72 square feet. We can separate three animals, up to three animals in that space, and use it as a hospital space, use it as a place to separate them, and still have the rest of the pigs in the pen have the ability still to have access to feed, water, and their sleeping environment. So those two designs have really taken what we would have called our standard layout and adjusted it for Prop 12, giving us some ability to make some adjustments within the same type of arrangement. And we see this being used in the first 6 weeks. We see it being used even in the last 10 weeks after post-implantation. Next slide. So the other part of this is then, okay, so we were comfortable. We've got experience, the industry has experience with the last 10 weeks or post-implantation. What we had to do is go to and understand how we would adjust the first 6 weeks of pre-implantation. The same principles apply to that as they did back in the 80s when we originally moved sows into stalls, and that is we want to be able to individually feed sows. We want to be able to give sows a place that they can feel safe and protected. And so we tend to look at these first 6 weeks and find options of what we can. And really, in all the designs and layouts that we've done to date, Prop 12 and pre-implantation, it's 3 options. It's either a ESF pen, okay, or a free access stall pen, or stanchion pens. And those can be used for pre-implantation, post-implantation, or a combination of the two. And so we start to lay this into barns and figure out how it goes together. And there's advantages and disadvantages to each one of them. So the ESF pen will be the cheapest system. It will allow you to individually feed sows. And it takes less of the barn space because we don't have as many walkways and things like that. The free access gives the animal the ability to separate itself from the pen, the rest of the population. It reduces training because when you drop feed, they go in and eat, right? It still uses more barn space because of just the layout and the walkways that are required. And there are no RFID tags. Remember, you're not necessarily feeding animals. Stanchions will be middle of the road, easy transition. They require smaller pens. There's no RFID tags needed. So there's some advantages to stanchions. The disadvantages for each one of these systems then too, as we put this stuff together, is the cost of the RFID for the ESF pen, the people and the training, because it's a different system. Remember, your heat check and preg check will be done in an open pen. There is no place in an ESF pen for an animal to hide or separate itself from the rest of the general population. The free access stall is going to be the most expensive option. It takes up more of your barn space, and you don't really have control of individual feed. The stanchion, you are dropping feed basically to the pen. individual stanchions, but to control which sow gets which is not very good. It is pretty poor utilization of your barn space because because of the walkways. It's going to be a higher cost because of all the penning that's involved, and so there's cons to each one. There's pros to each one. As we start to lay these things out, a lot of it has to do with existing barns in remodels and what fits. A lot of it has to do with how we're going to move forward managing people. There's a definite cost difference, and there's a definite barn size difference when we start putting these things in place. So as we move forward, then we worked with Martin Family Farms and Brian on these options and how we did it. And that was the way that Martin Family Farms at North Fork decided to move forward, is with 6 weeks in free access stalls, 10 weeks post-implantation in Maximus free access ESF.
Yeah, that's a great overview of the three main systems that we've had to really deal with, and obviously with Prop 12, it's not an all-inclusive list. Obviously there's other ways you can do it, but we wanted to just highlight what were the most three common systems that people were asking. And like Joel just said, we started to work with our guest panelist, Brian Martin, back in about 2020 on his Prop 12 remodel. And we're going to bring Brian in here shortly. But one of the things there was that Brian's was actually done with the sows still in the farm as well. So it wasn't a case of clear the barns out and do the remodel. And Brian's is a 10,000 sow farm. And I always describe that as being like the Titanic. And so literally Brian was moving the deck chairs on the Titanic while the Titanic was still sailing, which was quite an achievement. And we'll cover that with Brian here shortly. So this farm already had ESF, and they decided to do the 6 and 10 Prop 12 pig flow design, which Joel just covered there, that basically from weaning to 6 weeks of pregnancy, the pigs are in free access stalls. And you'll see the picture on the top right there. That is actually not Brian's barn, but it does show free access stalls. And in this particular case, those are new free access stalls. And something that Brian did was actually use his existing stalls and retrofit them to make them into free access stalls. So I'm sure we'll touch on that. And then after that, they go to an ESF pen from 6 weeks through to the rest of pregnancy until they go to farrowing. And like Joel mentioned, there's obviously some pros and cons in all those systems, and they're listed there on the left-hand side. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on those because I'm sure Brian will cover some of those when we talk to him. But in working with Brian, I know that he actually took those 4 Ps into consideration, maybe subconsciously, throughout that process of remodeling his farm. One of the things there is I feel that Brian, by doing the 6 and 10 pig flow system, he got a balance really between simplicity and technology by using both of those systems. And I think that that's something that maybe is going to be beneficial in the long run to the farm. So with that, I'd like to ask Brian to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself and his operation.
So thanks a bunch, Joel and Robert, for the time to join today. A little bit about ourselves first. I always consider probably the most prominent thing that we have done is through the years, we've been mentored by Robert. So I've worked with him since probably the 90s, so at least a third of his time, and appreciate his input. Also, another prominent member of Maximus worked with Wes Flack for a while, so good group of people there. So about us, 5th generation pig farm, had a unique path, meaning started out of college in industry in the packing business. Following that, got into production, but was really working corporate in construction-oriented jobs through the years. And then about 11 years ago now, got out of the corporate world and became part of the system we have today, which is 14,000 sows, 10,000 and a 4,000, and we're located in Northwest Indiana.
Thanks for those comments, Brian. We'll make sure the check is put in the mail as soon as we get done here today. So yes, if you can just take us through this slide and tell us a little bit about the operation.
Will do. So this slide gives a little more perspective to just what we do. Top part there in the upper right picture shows our 10,000 sow farm that we built in 09 and 10. And from the outset was loose sow house, would have been stalls through preg check, and then ESF post. Our second sow farm, much older, built in 96, as a part of what now is Christensen's system. It was at that time Heartland Pork. It's 4,000 sows and about 40 miles from the other. We also finish a portion of our pigs that end up in the plant, Clemens plant that's in southern Michigan. Been a good long-standing relationship with them. We also sell through an Ohio producer named Thompson Farms that it's been going to IPC for years. So that was my initial experience in packing. I worked at IPC for 3 or 4 years in the early days.
So back in, I think it was about 2009, Brian, when North Fork Farm was done, you decided to go with electronic sow feed. And then, I mean, that's 12, 13 years ago now. So that was a big decision that you made then. So why exactly did you go with ESF when you initially started the farm?
Yeah, great question. So that would go back to, well, it'd be like early 2000s. Some of us that are older remember this. Robert would be one. That Smithfield, I think in 03, made an announcement that was really induced by some public pressure to plan to get out of or move away from gestation stalls. And they've done that through the years. And at that time, we worked with a company called M2P2, had about 60,000 sows across from North Carolina to Oklahoma. And we were getting ready to construct some new facilities. And the Smithfield decision led that company to consider in its new construction moving that direction. And the production team at that time would have looked, actually, I think, looked across the world and spent some time looking at the options to do something other than a gestation stall. And that team's effort landed us feeling comfortable with ESF and built a farm very similar to our current farm. We built it in North Carolina. That farm today is owned by Smithfield. But we built an ESF farm in 06 that was really the result of that conversation. And I guess our comfort at the time with that being the best choice for something other than a stall.
Yeah, no, I remember that well. I think my qualification to go on the trip around the world to look at ESF was based on the fact that I think only 2 of us had a valid passport at the time. So that was an enjoyable trip. So if we roll forward then, Brian, to the decision that you had to make to, well, you didn't have to make it, but you did make, to remodel the farm to Proposition 12. What was the biggest driver behind making that decision?
Yeah, so like always, multiple facets to that vision. I'll pick out the two top ones from our perspective today. And remember, we did our remodel through 21, really from May to early December. We did that work as we were trying to meet, and we did meet the time schedule plan for implementation of the California Prop 12 rule. So our decision-making process would have been early in 21, and it was brought forth in consideration. Our customer, so Clemens Food Group, recognized the opportunity that production system, a large part of it is loose sow house and has been for years, as we have been. So our customers saying, here's an opportunity we see, it's uncertain where it's headed. So that was number one in our consideration of it. Two, we had a 10, 11-year-old electronic sow feeding system that was mechanical, and it was requiring, it did require a significant amount of attention from our people to maintain it, keep it going. Those are the two drivers.
Yeah, that's great. If we take a look at the next slide here, what that's going to show us is the orientation of the site prior to doing the remodel. Maybe you could just quickly take us through that overview.
Glad to do it. So we're looking at, on the left there is a top view of our farm as originally constructed. Top two barns are farrowing. The bottom four are gestation. The red components of the bottom four are areas that were all gestation stalls. They were 26 inches by 7 feet, a little bigger than normal on purpose. And those areas would have housed our breeding snakes. So weeks 0 to 6 of gestation and breeding in that area. And then the white portions of those four barns are ESF pens, would have been 56 pens across those three barns. The building to the right is a gilt developing unit that housed growing gilts from 6 weeks of age to 30.
Yep. That gives us a good idea of what you had before. So just looking at the picture on the right, that's the stations that you had in there for about 10 to 12 years. So we have the front exit ESF or conventional ESF being used to this point. And then there was a switch to the back out Maximus style ESF. So basically what we're looking at, I'm sure most of you know, but the front exit ESF, you're going to have pens of somewhere about 65 to, I know, up to 85 per station, with the sows going through that. And then obviously with the new system you have today, you're looking at somewhere around about 15 up to 20 sows per station with 4 stations in a pen. So when you did that remodel, Brian, you'd obviously used the front exit for a number of years, and you decided to change to the back out ESF. What was the driver behind making you switch ESF systems?
Yeah, great question. And the same as most, there's a multiple answer. So one is, I mentioned earlier, I guess is most know in the pig world, less mechanical tends to be a benefit to us. And although we got along well with a walkout or straight through station, there certainly became issues relative to mechanics. And then the manufacturers in a different, well, he's in Europe, or he was in Europe. And while we love Europeans, Robert being one of them, occasionally they may tend to be not as focused on our success as we wish. So, a manufacturer closer to home, a simpler idea. Probably another big driver would have been that instead of one feeding station for a pen of 70 to 80 sows, having multiple options inherently has some logic to it, meaning more options, less competition, and as I mentioned, Maximus, less mechanical. I will say also in this, the electronic components, meaning software, information, and how it functions. While we got along well in the past, you want to see in time that technology and software are continually becoming easier and easier for the novice like me and the 40 people that manage it to touch, understand, get value out of. Ease of use is important, and that was a player in it.
Yeah, you are also now using the Maximus software with the equipment as well. Just like to point out there, though, I did actually become a citizen a couple of years ago, so I no longer can totally claim to be European. But obviously, when we have our Ryder Cup bet every 2 years now, I'm going to be on the winning side, whoever wins. So that'll be good as well. So just looking at the picture on the left, the 0 to 6 weeks in stalls, that was what you actually retrofitted and turned into free access stalls. So we know that animal flow is critical on a sow farm. So mixing sows at wean and brine, for example, that's probably going to be a new experience for pretty much all the employees on the farm. So what have you learned to date with that particular process?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. So I think as you look at as we today, so remember we started breeding in that remodel vision back in November. So we're just headed into the second term, and clearly if we look back, the biggest thing we underestimated was our ability to be nimble in transitioning from what we become used to for 10 years into seeing wean sows arrive in a pen of 70, and the chaos that's ensued around it now. We'll talk later. I know we see that improving, but it was breeding in that environment initially caused us certainly some extra fallout.
Yeah, that's kind of understandable and to be expected. I know when we had our initial discussions on doing the remodel, I want to talk a bit about the people because we know how critical they are. And throughout that remodel process, I noticed that you always kept those people involved. And how important was that? And to make sure that those people had buy-in to the changes that you were making on the farm.
Yeah, I think that's a grander vision of management and ultimately team building, right? That the guy that is, whether he's heat checking or managing flow from farrowing to breed to gestation, we want everyone invested in where we're going. So the answer to that question is back in early 21, when we began to consider a change, it would have been the beginning point to say to the guys, here's a vision that we see, that a market that's out there for us to be a part of, and we want to head this way. We engaged at that point in saying, what preferred process do we collectively think works, and then talk through consensus to that, and that was our approach at the beginning. So the guy that ultimately was doing it knew, at least understood the basic vision of what we were trying to achieve, to feel like he's a part of that grand goal. Yeah, no, I've met all the team out there, and you have a great team of people, and having them engaged in that from a very early part of the process of remodeling for Prop 12, I'm sure is going to be a big benefit down the road to you. So one of the things there with the ESF, then you went from a post-implantation system to a pre-implantation system to comply with Prop 12.
So what have you seen so far regards production performance, and how have those production numbers stacked up compared to what you'd actually hoped for to date?
Yeah, and you realize, and everyone on that knows pig production recognizes this. We, 1 week or 1 month or 1 quarter don't speak to the long term. It's an everyday long term game. And I would say this with certainty: when we began, I remember being in conversations about what we would expect potentially to calculate to lose in farrowing rate or pigs weaned, and our expectation was that we would see just a small bump negative. So I've seen some data that suggests that that's a pig and a half a sow. For us, that initial transition starting to breed in November was 4 or 5, 6 points. There's weeks where it was more of farrowing rate drops. We had a lot more fallout in the early groups. I will say we're seeing that come our way, but pretty big fallout. And I attribute that to mostly the system. Also, we talked recently, we think sows are animals of habit. We believe as we hit the second turn with the system, we start to see the animal also work into that routine better. So that's initially more fallout, more leg problems, etc.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure once Zell gets his teeth into it, those numbers are going to turn around. So, so if we transition to the next slide, this shows the after the remodel. So maybe just give us a quick overview there, how that changed there with the drawing on the left-hand side, Brian.
Perfect. So picture to the left is the same as previous slide, and the bottom 4 gestation barns, nothing changed about the structure of the buildings. We just altered the equipment inside. And so the top and bottom gestation are all now stanchion pens, and those are housing, and it's 24 square feet. They're housing, again, weeks 0 to 6 bred, and our breed snake happens there. And then the 2 middle gestations just below, those became Maximus pens of 70. And those would house a big portion of our post-preg check gestation. And then the barn to the right, which formerly was GDU, converts to additional gestation space. And again, 24 square feet. And what we did then, if you look at the big picture pig flow, we are housing the same number of operating sows. We removed growing gilts. Currently, we are breeding some gilts offsite as well to bring in, just to keep ourselves at the 10,000 sow level.
Yep, and the picture there is showing the 0 to 6 weeks shows where you did the conversion of the existing stalls, and you made those, I know. So I think you can show, I believe, 4 animals in at a time, and made them into a free access stall. So
yeah, great. Thanks for the highlight. I guess I'll add there, essentially what we did, which as far as I know at the moment, I don't know of anyone else that headed this way. I had too much heartburn with the thought of new, I think the free access stalls that are out there. Crystal Springs is in the range of $400 each. Wonderful piece of equipment, I'm sure. We chose to beef up our stalls, take the backs off of them, and put a drop-down door on them. I guess I said no one else. I know Smithfield did at least one farm, I think in Circle 4, following a similar model, except they probably shortened the stall. The right picture that's here is the 70 sow pen with 4 Maximus stations in it.
So you mentioned there the off-site gilt breeding project. Obviously, that's a very important portion of what you now do that's helped you keep the work and inventory of the system to similar to where it was before. How's that process of the off-site gilt breeding gone for Proposition 12 so far?
Yeah, I guess as we look broadly at it, you know, I think our biggest challenge was the day that we started to wean into open pens. The offsite GDU and subsequent breeding process certainly not preferred because you're starting a new farm. That inherent in it for us, a positive was that we have some flexibility in space in our system due to some old farms nearby, and fortunate to have a strong breeder that did that work. Although it was starting a new farm, we've seen success there and continue to at the moment. So it's going well. There are certainly some benefits to having it offsite because we specialize labor on those gilts, and the guys are doing well.
That's great. That's great, because I know that's going to be the kind of the engine room of the farm, right? So hopefully that continues to do well. I know you've had a lot of experience with construction over the years, Brian. What's your estimate for the current cost of sow barn construction on a square foot basis? And then how would you see that change for a Prop 12 design?
Yeah, the certainly, as everyone all knows, every piece of construction, whether it's home or farm, is in the mode of straight up. And I didn't come with the math in my head for per square foot. What I know better is going to be per space. And I would tell you, this farm, when it was built new in 2011 or 2010, would have finished in the range of 11 to 1200 per sow. And new construction, conventional today, I think, of course, there's so many variables, filters, GDUs, et cetera, but still going to run at least double that. So 2,500 to 3,000. And if you put Prop 12 on it, another 20% just for space, I would say.
So I know obviously one of the drivers there is going to be incentives and premiums paid by the packers, and obviously assuming that those are again met. Do you feel that that actually is fair for what Prop 12 is requiring you, excuse me, requiring you to do? And so do you think it's all going to be worthwhile?
Yeah, I guess I'd be the eternal optimist on that question. So when we came into it, we knew there was a premium in front of us offered by the processor. The projections for premium day one certainly exceed what we got, and that would have been due to the legal timeline of Prop 12. Important component is today we are being paid a premium, and glad to be getting that. Hope for more in the future.
Okay, so we can just go to the next slide there. This is I always like the picture that you actually have behind you, and we have that on the next slide. In fact, your brother Brian, your brother David actually told me that this picture was taken. It was either from a hot air balloon or from your private jet. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure which of those is true, but the dawn of Proposition 12, that is an absolutely fantastic picture. And so we're going to take a look at, we've got time, I think, for one question that I can ask both of you. And so I'll go with Joel first. This is a question that's come in, and if you have other questions, please put those in the chat box. If we don't have time to get to them, we will get answers for you. So Joel, what would be your best practice advice that you would give anyone looking to do Proposition 12 or group housing based on both your past and most recent experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. Prop 12, well, loose housing. From a loose housing perspective, we've worked and looked at designing the pens for the bottom 10% or the 10% most timid pigs in a pen. If we can design pens and lay it out so that those animals, those timid animals, will go in and eat, we can reduce labor and competition and have much more success in the pen. So when we put together Prop 12 or any open pen gestation, we always look at designing them for the bottom 10% or the 10% most timid animals.
Okay, that's great. That same question to you, Brian. What would be your feeling on something that would be a best practice advice for people that are thinking about doing Proposition 12?
Yeah, I guess, and again, looking at that question globally, and this would go back to how we looked at something besides a gestation stall. The simple answer is having a vision for being nimble to change and flexibility, i.e., what we're doing today in sow production, I'm certain won't be the same in 5 or 10 years. And so a good example for us in our remodel is that we set up a stanchion system with using an existing stall and using it as a stanchion. If something changes in the future, we left it flexible to potentially do something different. Or another good example is total slats in a gestation. That leaves you ultimately able to wipe it out at any point and start again. So flexibility.
Yeah, and you know, I come up with a 4P acronym that we used earlier on. I think if you consider the people and the pigs as you're making these decisions, then hopefully the production will follow if those decisions are made wisely, and hopefully the pocketbook will also get to where it doesn't have to be opened more than necessary to meet these requirements, and a successful system can be set up. So I want to thank both Brian and Joel today, and also everyone for listening this morning to the webinar. And we are going to actually be at the World Pork Expo in Des Moines, Iowa on June the 8th to the 10th. I think we have the next slide, if we can put that up. And you can come and have a chat with Joel and myself, or come with that, any other member of the Maximus team will all be there, and hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions. I hope everyone has found the webinar useful today. Again, if you have, there's a few questions that came in, and we will try and get back to everyone, or we will get back to everyone with the answers to any questions that we weren't able to get to due to time this morning. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.